this ranking from worst to best, I will rank the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movies. Now here's the thing. When it comes to films that are ranked the lowest, we have to remember that this is about an idea that was never meant to be taken seriously, as the original Turtles comics were meant to be a parody of the graphic novels of the time. We can criticize the humor and the campiness associated with many of the movies, but as a Turtle fan, I understand that all of the movies have juvenile, corny moments, that campiness comes with the territory, when it's a movie about 4 mutant reptilian ninjutsu fighting teenage superheroes, with a rat for a master. And when we go through this ranking, we see that no two movies are the same. Even all of the sequels of the different series they're supposed to be part of have different tonal shifts. Some movies go more for the dark and serious gritty atmosphere, others tone that back into be more lighthearted and colorful. And in other movies, the Turtles aren't really as wisecracking and fun, while others, they go way overboard with the wisecracking, corny moments. All of the movies, even the quote-unquote bad Turtle movies, have their highlights and bright spots that I always enjoy. So what do I feel works best and what doesn't? Well, let's watch along, or listen along if you're playing this while you're driving, and here's my ranking of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movies from worst to best. Pretty much, this movie sets the benchmark for quality when it comes to any of the Ninja Turtle movies now, as the question with every new release will always be, well, is it as bad as Ninja Turtles 3, or is it worse? Well, 30 years later since the release of this movie, and no TMNT movie since has achieved that honor. Turtles 3 remains the worst Ninja Turtles movie ever made. Sure, Turtle Tunes and Wish You a Turtle Christmas and the Coming Out of Our Shells concert video, or the making of video, are definitely much more painful and cringe-inducing experiences, but Turtles 3 still remains as the movie that nearly ruined the franchise for good. I remember after this movie came out noticing the franchise going largely dormant for many years until the 2003 cartoon came out. So where do I begin? I was really young when this movie came out, and while I don't remember seeing it in theaters, I do remember seeing it on VHS or on TV and just not being impressed with this movie the same way I felt about the other two. I remember thinking something was off, like everything exciting and cool about the Turtles was just no longer there. And I was 5 to 6 when this came out. Maybe it was a change in scenery, or maybe it was because I felt like the overall plot was just boring. You look at it now and you see how much of a huge downgrade it was compared to the first two movies. Not that the first two movies were amazing masterpieces, but this one was just a huge disappointment. Like, it didn't even feel like a Turtles movie. Now, the time travel thing to Japan doesn't really bug me, but compared to what was done before, and then instead of the Foot Clan and Shredder and mutant creatures, which is what the first two movies had, and then, of course, you had the source material from the popular cartoon, the video games, and toy lines having a lot of baddies and characters that could have been used. We instead got a lame samurai warlord and a western cowboy, played by the man who was fresh off of playing the bad guy in Lethal Weapon 3, and who would go on to play the bad guy in Mask of Zorro a few years later. Point is, it wasn't the actor Stuart Wilson's fault his character sucked. There was just very little compelling when it came to storytelling. It also had fewer action scenes, and if you were a Michelangelo fan, then you would have hated seeing him sidelined for most of it.
We're turtles, friend. The Teenage Mutant Ninja variety. Sleazeball. Hey, you were expecting maybe the Addams Family? Help, I'm a turtle and I can't get up.
Pretty much all of the one-liners and corny jokes in this movie result in an audible groan from yours truly. Every viewing with this movie is harder to sit through, and I usually only want to skip to the very few parts I still enjoy. And yes, we have to mention that the turtle costumes just look terrible compared to the way the costumes looked in prior efforts. Largely because they chose not to pay Jim Henson's Creature Shop and went for a cheaper option, even though they had a bigger budget apparently. And because this movie takes place predominantly during the day and lighting on those costumes just exposed how much cheaper they looked. Splinter especially looks like a broken down Chuck E. Cheese animatronic. The only bright spots in this movie involve the comic relief subplot with Casey Jones having to take care of the 4 samurai guards and trying to show them things like 20th century stuff like TV and hockey, and the stuff still remains as the highlight and makes me laugh.
Okay, guys, let's play a little hockey. Come on. Just like you saw on TV. Remember?
야, 호깨다. 호깨의ことがホッケー.
Okay, I can work with that.
Casey's actor, Elias Koteas, also appears as an anti-hero character in feudal Japan. And you can clearly tell he's the only person trying in either role he plays in this movie. And Paige Turco returning as April isn't doing too bad either. But you know it's bad when it's considered worse than the Michael Bay movies, which we'll get to. Now, whether this was supposed to be a standalone reboot that was supposed to kickstart another series, or if it was supposed to be in the same universe as the prior movies in the 90s, either way, the CGI looks awesome. And when the movie does pick up the action, it does draw you into the atmosphere and makes you think, this is going to be great. And then the plot kicks in. And then we're immediately thinking, what the hell is going on? Who is this guy? Was there a movie I missed? What is this backstory we're going over? The shift in tone makes it feel like it's taking itself way too seriously. And instead of the turtles being fun and engaging, they're almost too brooding, like a lot of the superhero movies being made at the time. This was 2 years shy of when Batman Begins came out. The plotline itself just gets way too all over the place for a Ninja Turtles movie. And the person who was initially supposed to be the bad guy feels like a waste of Patrick Stewart's voice talents. But hey, at least the action scenes are fun to watch, though at times I feel like they're cutscenes from a video game, aiding and kicking some ass with the turtles, as well as Splinter joining the fight along with the 4 turtles. So is this a prequel to Shredder's Revenge? Even though this is not necessarily a terrible TMNT movie, it does have some things to enjoy about it, but the main reason why TMNT from 2007 is ranked so low is that I often forget that it exists. It's largely forgettable and doesn't make any lasting impressions. It never made that big of a splash when it first came out all those years ago, and I've never heard anyone talking about how amazing it was. If they had made this movie a lot more fun and engaging with a much simpler plot, then this could have been an amazing experience that kickstarted a new series. But instead of a sequel that the movie teased, this attempt to reinvent the Turtles movies went out with a whimper and caused them to reboot into the next entry in this ranking. Now I know that the Michael Bay movies have their legion of supporters, and I will not put anyone down for liking them. But please don't tell me, he didn't direct it, he just produced it. No, he has his name attached to it, and he has his fingerprints all over this movie. So we can go over what went on behind the scenes and how much of a mess it was to make this movie and the constant changes to the script, such as the leaked initial idea that the Turtles would be from an alien race, leading to a lot of fan backlash before this movie even came out. But to save time, we really should just go over the finished film and what was released in 2014. So let's begin with what pretty much everybody hates about this movie, the design of the Turtles, particularly their faces. The body and armor designs I actually think are good and cool, as it helps you differentiate between the different Turtles and reflects their individual personalities. But good God, those faces are ugly. They tried way too much to be photorealistic on their faces, and in the end just made them look like bad, annoying orange effects. But fine. We get used to them as we watch the film, and ultimately, the turtles themselves are actually the best parts of the entire movie. It's fun when they interact with each other, and that semi-truck down the mountain action scene was really well done with them utilizing the turtles in their own unique way. Oh, and that elevator scene. But unfortunately, we really don't get to see the turtles that often in this movie. They feel more like background characters to the plot, and instead a lot of the focus is more on Megan Fox's April and the other human characters, which we could take or leave. Megan Fox isn't that bad as April, but it often does feel like she took lessons from the Kristen Stewart school of emoting and tends to look disengaged for a good portion of it. While I actually didn't mind that much that she helped deliver the final blow to Shredder, I still feel like too much of the focus is on April. Last time I checked, this movie was named Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, not Days of April O'Neil. Will Arnett's Vern is supposed to be the male comic relief sidekick, but he comes off as lame. Shredder in this movie is more of a common thug, and the real villain is really William Fichtner's character, who in initial drafts was supposed to be revealed to be the Shredder, which I actually would have welcomed. But the rest of the plot does feel like a mess, and you really don't get to know the turtles in the same way the other films do. And I can also say that while some of the action scenes are great, others feel like they come straight out of a Transformers movie, especially Shredder's design. And a lot of the CGI effects look bad then, look worse now. It's not the worst of the TMNT movies, but definitely not great either. But it was a success at the box office, which led to a sequel that we will get to. But speaking of sequels, The Search for More Money, The Secret of the Ooze, literally has the first 5 minutes, and that opening fight scene set the tone on whether you think this will be so bad it's funny, or you'll immediately hate it compared to the 1990 movie. Whereas the 1990 movie was a live-action adaptation of the comics with some elements of the cartoon, this movie felt more like an adaptation of the cartoon, with the violence and dark atmosphere being scaled down, the turtles not really using their weapons as much, and they don't swear anymore. Now, we all know this was a direct result of, quote, concerned parents who complained the 1990 movie was too dark and violent for children, and of course they didn't like the foul language. In the 1990 movie, here's really what they were saying.
Damn! Don't just ninja kick the damn rabbit! Damn!
But to millions of mothers of America, they may as well have been saying,
You fucking paranoid, you are fucking, you fucking, you bloody, you bloody, bastard bitch, you fuck you. You fuck me, I fuck you bloody.
and oh no, can't use bows and nunchucks and sais and katanas, but it's okay for Mikey to whack guys with yo-yos and salami, and let's teach kids to turn every household object and their toys into weapons. I'm also not the biggest fan of the character Keno being in the movie replacing Casey Jones, who was taken out due to the tonal shift to be more lighthearted. It was also a different actress playing April who did a decent job with what she was given. But they were clearly Batman Forevering this series before that became a thing, because they felt safe and marketable would have kept the money train rolling. But what fighting and action there is in this movie is still enjoyable. The story and plot was definitely a continuation of the story from the first movie, and we all remember it for the appearance of Toka and Razor, the big battle in the club where Vanilla Ice is performing. The martial arts in this movie still look impressive, the costumes still look great, the familiar 80s and early 90s synth music score still kicks ass. You still get a sense for who the Turtles are and their relationship with each other in Splinter. The jokes and one-liners are definitely cornier than what we saw in the previous movie, but there still are moments that do make me laugh.
Hey, Mike, you think you could crunch any louder? I can still hear out of this one. Phew.
Super Shredder was awesome too, although we only see a little bit of him. And we can still call bullshit on Kevin Nash doing the job for a dock falling on him. Maybe he tore both his quads again. The Secret of the Ooze is a downgrade from the original, but still an enjoyable experience as a whole. But it is understandable why a lot of people would not like this movie that much. Is it a lame movie? Yeah, but I still liked it as a kid, and I can still enjoy it as an adult. Now, this sequel to the 2014 movie, I went into the theater expecting to trash and hate this movie because I wasn't a major fan of the prior one. But I was pleasantly surprised and came out of the theater thinking, wow, I actually enjoyed that. Now, does it have problems? Of course it does. The plot line is even more fast-paced and wastes little time in throwing more shit at you before you can digest what you've just seen or heard. You still get the same Megan Fox and Will Arnett issues as before. Some might not like the tonal shift, that the movie clearly takes itself way less seriously than the 2014 effort, but I still think that's what made it better. Now, I was glad to see Casey Jones on the big screen again, this time played by Stephen Amell, but with each viewing, the more I realize this character version of Casey Jones is the complete opposite of what he was in the comics and some of the past cartoons. The Casey that most fans love and cosplay as, including yours truly, would not be a clean-cut police officer with an anger issue. At least in the fight scenes, he retains the coolness and intimidation factors that what made him awesome. In an effort to give the fans, quote, what they all want, we finally get to see Krang on the big screen, but he's arguably one of the weakest parts of the movie. But hey, we get Baxter Stockman, played by Tyler Perry, and resembling like what he does in the comics. But he doesn't really do much. Neither does Shredder, for that matter, who you could take out of the movie entirely and not miss a thing because he ultimately was just a pawn to Krang. Literally in the movie, you had Shredder betray Baxter, only for Krang to betray Shredder. So yes, cut out Shredder and the middleman, and the movie would have made more sense. And they tease the Technodrome, but you never really get it. At least Bebop and Rocksteady are still fun, even if the dick jokes can get cringy at times. And it is also cool to see Rocksteady played by Sheamus of the WWE, another wrestling reference. Unlike the 2014, this time around we get more of a focus on the Turtles themselves, who have great chemistry with each other. They have great dramatic moments too when there are conflicts of interest between them. And the action scenes involving the plane and the fight with Bebop and Rocksteady are a very definite highlight. The overall look and feel of this movie is much better as well, as I did like the special effects and the cool turtle gadgets a lot more. This movie was definitely an attempt to be like the 1980s cartoon to try and get a lot more nostalgic viewers to flock to the silver screen. And in many ways, it felt a lot more like a Ninja Turtles movie, especially compared to 2014. But ultimately, it wasn't as successful at the box office and caused further sequels in this series to be scrapped. Now, I am literally writing this portion of the narration mere hours after I saw Mutant Mayhem for the first time in theaters. I went to see it with just as much of a clean state about this film as possible. Aside from seeing a teaser trailer or two, I chose not to read up on anything about Mutant Mayhem until I saw it on the big screen. Sure, I was absolutely expecting the worst, and I sat in the back of a packed AMC theater filled with adults and kids with their parents on Saturday's showing, and I genuinely enjoyed the experience with this film. The kids all seemed to enjoy it too, and there were definitely moments that made me laugh. I came out thinking, wow, this is way better than I thought it would be. Now, what drew me in was the art style. It's fantastic. I love the atmosphere that can remind the viewer of the old comic books from years past. The animation style, which uses both stop motion and CGI, I think is great. I did like the character designs, familiar enough for the older fans, but different where it's easier to tell the four turtles apart. Some might have issues with the turtles themselves looking less muscular and more like teenagers, but wait a minute, isn't that in their freaking name? So what if Michelangelo had braces? At least it's better than the character designs from the Michael Bay movies, right? I will admit, I was a little annoyed by Donatello's kid voice, but then I had to remember back when I was in high school, or when I was coaching high school kids, that you would have a 6-foot-tall 13-year-old that looked and sounded like a 30-year-old. Hell, when Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson was in high school, his classmates thought he was an undercover cop. And then at the same time, you'd have a 15 to 16-year-old barely hitting 5 feet and sounding like they hadn't hit puberty yet, which the actual voice actor, Micah Abbey, was 14 to 15 years old when he recorded his lines for Donatello. In fact, by the end of the movie, I actually liked they were voiced by teenagers and young adults, and they weren't necessarily big-name actors. Speaking of April, it might surprise you that her design did not bug me one bit. And yes, do I as an adult prefer the hot redhead fox from years past? Of course I do. And since I feel like I have to address the race and diversity push thing, sure, I'm not a fan of white redheads being recast by blacks, because redheaded women are actually more rare and less represented in popular media than black people are. But she had already been African American in other cartoons, and if you look at the old Eastman and Laird comics, she wasn't exactly a white redhead either. She was almost mixed race and could have been interpreted either way. And in terms of her fatter body shape, I did not see it as an activist push for fat acceptance or body positivity. You know, the whole fat is beautiful and healthy crowd. Please date me even though I'm an obese pig crowd. And April's character wasn't doing any of the sorts. Jackie Chan was hilarious as Splinter, as he had the biggest laughs in the theater when I saw the movie. And while some of the jokes from the Turtles felt like they dragged on, the jokes from Splinter managed to freshen them up even if they were repetitive. And sure, there were definitely moments where the humor from the Turtles felt juvenile, and there were corny moments, but I have to remember, this movie wasn't made for me as a 35-year-old. It was made for the kids in the audience and the nostalgic adults who are still fans of the franchise. And as we go through all of the TMNT movies, we have to remember that all of them have corny moments, even the best films do. I did like the story being told, and I felt like it was a great movie about a father with his 4 sons, the importance of family, and the major thing of the movie being acceptance. This is a prime example of a real-world message being told correctly, with class, rather than feeling like you're being preached to or getting politically lectured. And I also really liked the music in this, and I felt the score is one of the best out of all the TMNT movies. Bottom line, I went in expecting to trash this movie, but I was pleasantly surprised. This was easily the best out of all the Nickelodeon-made Ninja Turtle movies thus far, and whereas I felt the 2 Michael Bay movies failed, this reboot started it back on the right track, and I will gladly see the sequel of this one. And if this series continues and includes my favorite character of the franchise, please, just please, don't fuck up Casey Jones! Now, obviously, this isn't a theatrical movie, and if you want to get me on a technicality, you can tell me, hey, this doesn't count, but I don't care. I'm ranking this one pretty damn high because I felt like this TV movie special was really good. It should have been a theatrical movie. It was a great 25th anniversary special that was a crossover between the 87 and 2003 Turtles, and was a definite finale of the 2003 series. Now, I get why there's detractors who hate the way the 87 Turtles are presented, and as I've said before, it was apparently done like that on purpose by Peter Laird, who had a hand in making the 2003 series as one final screw you to all the people who hated the 03 show because it wasn't like the 87 show. And I could see why other people saw this as a subliminal jab of the new show is better. But me having a good idea what both series were like definitely saw that, yes, the 87 Turtles were much more pizza-obsessed, wisecracking goofballs compared to the 2003 Turtles, which were more serious and adapted from the comics. Now, what I did like about this movie was the plot and the imagination with the storyline. It's a good story that one doesn't have to be a fan of either the 87 or 03 series to enjoy it. It's obvious that the writers really wanted to make a good movie rather than just a cheap crossover special. It felt like a story with the stakes being the highest and the urgency to not just save the turtles in the movie, but pretty much all of the incarnations that have come and gone before. It's well animated, has its good share of humor from all the incarnations featured, the action scenes are fun, and it was just an overall well-made movie that I enjoyed. I like the jokes involving the old whiny Shredder matching up against the newer Dark Shredder. I felt the interactions between the two turtle teams and their constant confusions of how their other world works was cleverly done. And the best parts for me were when the two teams end up in the same universe as the original 1984 Turtles, and showing them how much more badass the 84 Turtles were compared to the teams that came after them. Yes, would it have been better if they had the voice actors from the 87 show reprise their roles? Yeah, but it sucks they couldn't because of union rules. But anyway, it may not have been a movie in a sense of a theatrical release, but it was so well done in my book that it should have been, and should easily be seen as something on par with any of the Turtles movies, both good and bad. What about the other animated direct-to-video Turtles movies? They're okay, and worth watching at least once. Turtles Forever, on the other hand, I've enjoyed many times, and I feel like it's a great sentimental piece for all Turtles fans to cherish. Each time I see this one, it reminds me why I'm a fan of this franchise as a whole, and whether I will love or hate the future incarnations that come and go, at the end of the day, I'm still going to be a Turtles fan at the core. What can I say? There have been many other Turtles films after this one, some of them sequels, some of them as different incarnations, but over 30 years later, as of this recording, this movie still remains as the best and definitive Ninja Turtles movie. Period. Sure, some of the younger fans may think the other incarnations look better or prefer the CGI designs, and may have more of a connection to what they grew up with. But these costumes made by Jim Henson's Creature Shop were amazing for the time, and they still hold up very well decades later. Arguably more so than some of the CGI designs. And unlike the CGI, the stunts and the martial arts performed in this movie are still impressive and fun to watch. The movie's violence can get pretty intense for a PG-rated movie, marketed for families and kids, even more so than the PG-13 movies that came out years later. The story is also a good adaptation from the original comic series, which I do recommend for any Turtles fans to check out, especially in trade collections and compilations. When they do go through the backstory and focus on the Turtles, you definitely get a feel for who Splinter is, who the Turtles are. You get the father-son dynamic between them during the more touching moments. Plus, you definitely get enough time to know the Turtles' quirks and characteristics, especially Raphael. Plus, it has my man, Casey Jones, in a big role, and it was awesome to see him kicking some Foot Clan ass along with the Turtles. And of course, Judith Hoag remains as the best portrayal as April, who does a really good job at convincing us she has a good friendship with 4 mutant reptiles and a rat. On top of the main hero characters, you have a good focus on a father-son story arc, rather between April's boss and his rebellious teenage son, who gets caught up and involved with the Foot Clan and even leads the Foot Clan to the Turtles' hideout before redeeming himself later. Shredder in this movie is the right amount of intimidating and mysterious, even if some of the stuff he blatantly rips off are from other movies. But hell, he kicks the Turtles' ass and has to be taken out by their master Splinter, proving why Splinter earned the title of being this Master Sensei. The music in this movie is also really good, especially the theme known as the Shredder Suite. It's still the most memorable score out of all of the Turtles movies, and really adds to the intensity during the second act when the Foot Clan nearly kills Raphael and burns down April's antique shop. Now, is this movie perfect? Of course not. It's easy to say that it's as cheesy of a movie as the pizza the Turtles enjoy. Some of the jokes and one-liners approach the lame territory, And some can say the atmosphere of the late 80s, early 90s setting, especially the pop culture and celebrity references, make the movie look way outdated by today's standards. I mean, it has music by MC Hammer in it, as well as the TURTLE Power rap song, further making it a movie of the time. And also, the final confrontation between Splinter and Shredder also feels too short and anticlimactic, as the movie basically builds up who the Shredder really is in relation to Splinter, and we definitely would have enjoyed a little bit more of a Master versus Master showdown before the 7-story fall into a garbage crusher. But overall, it's a good movie. It's not a masterpiece by any means, but anytime I do watch it, it remains a positive experience. We have seen over the examples of differences in atmosphere and presentation, and the 1990 movie continues to prove what a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie needs to do in terms of the right amount of intensity, seriousness, campy humor, and action. The 1990 movie takes itself seriously, but not too seriously, like the 2007 and 2014 movies. It has corny and campy jokes, but doesn't go overboard, like the sequels of the 1990 movie. And it does have the right amount of pacing, instead of wasting zero time and throwing more exposition in your face like Out of the Shadows did. This movie wanted to be more grown up for the older fans of the comics, but still familiar enough for the younger fans of the cartoon who had all the toys. And they definitely succeeded, which is why at one point this was the highest grossing independent film of all time. Of all the Ninja Turtles movies, this is the one I highly recommend the most if you want to get a feel for what the Turtles were during the height of their popularity as pop culture icons, and the best example of what a good Turtles film should be if writers are looking for templates on future movies. But I am definitely excited to see where they go with the sequel for Mutant Mayhem when that comes out. But only time will tell if they finally got the winning formula down. The Ninja Turtles aren't going anywhere, and if one incarnation fails, another will rise in its place. Perhaps one day I'll review and rank all the TV shows from worst to best. And there you have it, folks. Hopefully you agree with me, but if you don't, I now leave it up to you in the comment sections to rank your own, or let me know what you think. I'm Desert Coyote 22. Thanks for listening. Leaders.